The gun trembled in Maya Rodriguez's hands as she stood in the doorway of the abandoned warehouse on Chicago's South Side. Rain hammered against the broken windows, and the smell of rust and decay filled the air. Across the dimly lit space, Detective Jake Morrison slowly raised his hands, but something in his eyes wasn't fear, it was relief. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Go ahead, he said quietly, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Pull the trigger. Maya's finger tightened on the trigger, her breath coming in short gasps. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. 3 years of carefully orchestrated moves, of building trust, of waiting for the perfect opportunity. But as lightning illuminated Jake's face through the grimy windows, she saw something that made her hesitate. He was smiling. 3 months earlier, Maya Rodriguez had been living a completely different life. She worked as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago, spending her days buried in spreadsheets and financial records, hunting for discrepancies that most people would never notice. Her apartment in Lincoln Park was modest but comfortable, filled with books about financial crimes and true crime, documentaries that she'd watch while eating takeout Chinese food. Maya had always been good with numbers. As a child growing up in Aurora, she could spot patterns where others saw chaos. Her mother, Carmen, used to joke that Maya could balance the family checkbook better than most adults before she turned 12. Her father, Miguel, who worked construction, would bring home his crew's timesheets, and Maya would catch errors that saved his company thousands of dollars over the years. But Maya's gift for numbers had a darker origin than her parents knew. When she was 15, her older brother Carlos had been killed in what the police called a gang-related shooting. The case was closed quickly, too quickly, Maya thought even then. Carlos had been walking home from his job at a local grocery store when someone shot him 3 times in an alley, just 2 blocks from their house. Detective Richard Brennan had handled the case. Maya remembered him clearly, a heavy-set man with tired eyes who seemed more interested in filing paperwork than finding answers. He'd told the Rodriguez family that Carlos had been involved with the wrong people, that these things happened in their neighborhood. But Maya knew her brother. Carlos had been saving money for community college, working double shifts, and staying away from the street corners where trouble usually started. The investigation lasted exactly 2 weeks. No arrests were made. No witnesses came forward. The case file gathered dust in some basement storage room while the Rodriguez family tried to piece their lives back together. Maya's parents never recovered. Her father started drinking heavily, losing job after job until the construction company stopped calling. Her mother retreated into herself, spending hours at church lighting candles for Carlos, praying to saints that seemed to have stopped listening. The family moved to a smaller apartment, then a smaller one after that. Maya watched her parents age 10 years in the span of 12 months. By the time Maya graduated high school, she'd made 2 decisions that would shape the rest of her life. First, she was going to college to study accounting and finance, no matter how many loans she had to take out. Second, she was going to find out what really happened to Carlos. College was a struggle. Maya worked 3 part-time jobs while carrying a full-course load at the University of Illinois. She cleaned offices before dawn, worked in the campus library between classes, and waited tables on weekends. Her grades never suffered. If anything, the constant pressure sharpened her focus. She graduated summa cum laude with a degree in accounting and a minor in criminal justice. The criminal justice courses were her real education. She learned how investigations worked, how evidence was collected and analyzed, how cases were built and lost. She studied forensic accounting, discovering how financial records could tell stories that witnesses couldn't or wouldn't tell. She learned about corruption, about how money moved through legitimate and illegitimate channels, about how the right payment could make problems disappear. After graduation, Maya landed the job with Henderson and Associates, a forensic accounting firm that primarily worked with law enforcement agencies and insurance companies. Her boss, Patricia Henderson, was a former FBI agent who'd seen every kind of financial fraud imaginable. Under Patricia's guidance, Maya learned to follow money trails that led through shell companies, offshore accounts, and deliberately complex corporate structures designed to hide the truth. Maya was good at her job, exceptionally good. She had an intuitive understanding of how criminals thought about money, how they tried to clean it and hide it and make it look legitimate. Her work led to dozens of arrests and millions of dollars in recovered assets. She built a reputation as someone who could find financial needles in legal haystacks, but Maya's real work happened after hours. Using the skills she'd learned at Henderson and Associates, she'd been quietly investigating her brother's death for years. She'd obtained copies of police reports through Freedom of Information Act requests. She'd tracked down witnesses who'd never been interviewed. She'd mapped out the financial relationships between various criminal organizations operating in Aurora during the time of Carlos's murder. What she found made her sick. Carlos hadn't been killed by gang members. He'd been killed because he'd witnessed something he shouldn't have seen, a drug transaction involving dirty money that connected street-level dealers to people much higher up the food chain. People who wore badges and carried legitimate credentials. The trail led to Detective Richard Brennan, who'd been taking payments from a drug distribution network in exchange for information about pending raids and investigations Carlos had seen. Brennan accepting an envelope of cash from Vincent Torres, a mid-level dealer who operated out of an auto repair shop 3 blocks from where Carlos worked. Torres had panicked when he realized Carlos had seen the exchange. Instead of reporting it to Brennan, Torres had made the decision to eliminate the witness himself. 2 days later, Carlos was dead in an alley, and Brennan had made sure the investigation went nowhere. Maya had documentation proving all of this. Bank records showing unusual deposits into Brennan's accounts. Phone records connecting him to known criminals. Witness statements from people who'd been too afraid to come forward 8 years ago but were willing to talk now. She had enough evidence to destroy Brennan's career and send him to prison for corruption, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. But Brennan had retired 2 years earlier and moved to Florida. Even if Maya could prove everything, the statute of limitations had run out on most of the charges. Carlos's murder remained technically unsolved, and Torres had been killed in an unrelated shooting 6 months after Carlos died. Maya felt like she was holding a smoking gun with no one left to shoot. That's when she learned about Detective Jake Morrison. Morrison was Brennan's former partner, and according to Maya's research, he'd been present during several of the meetings where Brennan had received information about police operations. Morrison had been involved in some of the same cases that had been mysteriously derailed by leaked information. Bank records showed that Morrison had also received unexplained cash deposits during the same time period as Brennan. Unlike Brennan, Morrison was still active with the Chicago Police Department. He'd been promoted to detective sergeant and was now heading up a task force focused on gang-related violence. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. The man who'd helped cover up her brother's murder was now supposedly dedicated to solving similar crimes. Maya spent months studying Morrison. She learned his routines, his habits, his weaknesses. Morrison lived alone in a condo in River North, having never married. He worked long hours and seemed genuinely committed to his job, which made Maya wonder if he'd gotten out of the corruption business or just gotten better at hiding it. Morrison had a reputation as a straight shooter among his colleagues. Other cops respected him. Victims' families trusted him. His conviction rate was impressive, and he'd never had any significant complaints filed against him. This made Maya's discovery even more infuriating. Morrison had built a career on the foundation of her brother's death, using the credibility he'd gained from covering up one murder to solve others. He'd been promoted and praised while Carlos remained buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery, his killer's true identity known only to Maya. Maya began attending community meetings where Morrison spoke about police efforts to reduce gang violence. She watched him promise grieving families that he would find answers for them, that he would bring justice to their neighborhoods. Each promise felt like a knife being twisted in Maya's chest. She started following Morrison more closely, learning his patterns and routines. Morrison typically worked late, often staying at the precinct until 8 or 9 in the evening. He'd stop for coffee at the same shop on Michigan Avenue every morning. He went to the same gym 3 times a week. On weekends, he volunteered at a youth center in Pilsen, teaching basketball to kids who reminded Maya painfully of Carlos at that age. The more Maya watched Morrison, the more conflicted she became. This wasn't the corrupt cop she'd expected to find. Morrison seemed genuinely dedicated to helping people, to making the city safer. But Maya had seen the bank records, the phone logs, the evidence that connected him to Brennan's corruption. Maya began to wonder if Morrison had changed, if he'd left his criminal past behind and was now trying to make amends through legitimate police work, but that possibility only made her angrier. Morrison had the luxury of redemption while Carlos remained dead, his family destroyed, his killer unpunished. Maya decided that Morrison needed to face consequences for what he'd done, even if the legal system wouldn't hold him accountable. She began planning something that would force Morrison to confront his past, to acknowledge his role in Carlos's death, to face the same fear and helplessness that her family had experienced. But Maya wasn't a killer by nature. She was an accountant who solved puzzles with spreadsheets, not violence. The idea of actually hurting someone, even someone who'd hurt her family, made her physically ill. She needed another approach, something that would deliver justice without making her into the same kind of person who'd killed Carlos. That's when Maya came up with her plan. She would confront Morrison with the evidence she'd gathered, force him to confess to his role in the cover-up, and record that confession. Then she'd release the recording to the media, to Internal Affairs, to anyone who would listen. Morrison's career would be over, his reputation destroyed, his life ruined in the same way her family's life had been ruined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Maya knew Morrison wouldn't just voluntarily confess to corruption and accessory to murder. She needed leverage, something that would convince him to tell the truth. She needed him to believe his life was in immediate danger, that cooperation was his only chance for survival. Maya had never held a gun before. She bought one from a private seller at a gun show in Indiana. She chose a small revolver, something that would be easy to handle and intimidating enough to get Morrison's attention. She practiced at a shooting range outside the city, learning to load and fire the weapon safely. Maya wasn't planning to actually shoot Morrison. The gun was a prop, a way to create the pressure she needed to extract a confession. But she wanted to be comfortable handling it, to make Morrison believe she was capable of using it if necessary. Over the following weeks, Maya refined her plan. She identified the abandoned warehouse on the south side as the perfect location. Isolated enough to avoid interruptions, but public enough that Morrison wouldn't disappear without anyone noticing. She researched Morrison's schedule and found a way to lure him to the location without arousing suspicion. Maya sent Morrison an anonymous tip claiming that she had information about a major drug operation based out of the warehouse. She suggested that Morrison come alone to avoid spooking her sources, and that he arrive at a specific time, when she knew the building would be empty. The tip was credible enough that Morrison couldn't ignore it, but vague enough that he wouldn't bring backup or notify other officers about the meeting. Maya had studied enough police procedures to know how to craft a message that would get Morrison's attention without raising red flags. On the night she'd chosen for the confrontation, Maya arrived at the warehouse 2 hours early. She disabled the building's few working lights and positioned herself where she could see Morrison approaching. She checked and rechecked the recording equipment she'd brought to capture Morrison's confession. As the appointed time approached, Maya's hands began to shake. She'd rehearsed what she would say, how she would present the evidence, how she would demand the truth about Carlos. But standing in the darkness of the abandoned warehouse, holding a loaded gun, Maya began to question whether she was making a terrible mistake. Then she saw headlights approaching through the rain, and it was too late to change her mind. Morrison's unmarked police car pulled up to the warehouse, and Maya watched through a broken window as he got out of the vehicle, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Morrison entered the warehouse cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Maya waited until he was far enough inside that retreat would be difficult, then stepped out of the shadows with her gun pointed at his chest. "Detective Morrison," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We need to talk." Morrison's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and Maya could see him calculating distances, exits, possibilities. His hand hadn't moved toward his weapon, which surprised her. Most cops would have drawn their gun the moment they saw an armed civilian. But Morrison just stood there, studying her face. "You're Maya Rodriguez," he said quietly. "Carlos's sister." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She hadn't expected him to know who she was, hadn't prepared for the possibility that Morrison might have been thinking about her family all these years. "You remember him," Maya said, keeping the gun trained on Morrison's chest. "That's more than Detective Brennan ever did." Morrison nodded slowly. "I remember Carlos. I remember that case. And I remember you, 15 years old, sitting in the precinct waiting room while your parents talked to Brennan. You kept staring at me like you could see right through me." Maya's finger trembled on the trigger. "Because I could. Even then, I knew something was wrong. I knew you and Brennan were hiding something." "You're right," Morrison said simply. "We were." The admission caught Maya off guard. She'd expected denials, excuses, attempts to justify what had happened. Morrison's straightforward acknowledgement left her momentarily speechless. "I was dirty back then," Morrison continued, his voice carrying 8 years of regret. "Brennan got me involved when I was young and stupid and thought I deserved more than my paycheck. We took money from Vincent Torres and his crew in exchange for information about raids and investigations." Maya steadied the gun with both hands. "And when my brother saw you taking that money, you decided he had to die." "No," Morrison said firmly. "That's where you're wrong. I didn't know Torres was going to kill Carlos. If I had, I would have stopped it." "Bullshit," Maya spat. "You covered it up afterward. You made sure the investigation went nowhere." Morrison's shoulders sagged. "You're right about that. After Carlos was murdered, Brennan told me we had to make the case disappear or we'd both go down. I was terrified. I had gambling debts. My mother was sick. I was looking at losing everything. So I helped bury the evidence." The rain continued to hammer against the warehouse windows, punctuating the silence between them. Maya felt tears mixing with the rainwater that had soaked through her jacket. "Do you know what happened to my family after Carlos died?" Maya asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Do you know what your cowardice cost us?" Morrison closed his eyes. "I know your father started drinking. I know your mother stopped leaving the house, except to go to church. I know you all had to move because your parents couldn't afford the rent anymore." Maya stared at him. "You were watching us?" "Not watching. Checking, making sure you were okay." Morrison opened his eyes and looked directly at Maya. "It doesn't excuse what I did, but I never stopped feeling responsible for what happened to your family." "Feeling responsible isn't enough," Maya said. "Carlos is still dead. Torres is dead too, so he'll never face justice. The only person left to pay for what happened is you." Morrison nodded. "I know. That's why I've been waiting." Maya frowned. "Waiting for what?" "For you to find me. For someone to hold me accountable." Morrison gestured around the empty warehouse. I knew this day would come eventually. I knew someone would piece together what really happened and come looking for justice. Maya's mind raced. This wasn't going according to her plan. Morrison was supposed to be defensive, desperate, willing to say anything to save his life. Instead, he seemed almost relieved to be confronted. "I want you to confess," Maya said. "I want you to admit on record that you and Brennan took bribes from Torres, that you covered up my brother's murder, that you let his killer walk free." Morrison reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Maya tensed, but instead of a weapon, Morrison pulled out a small digital recorder. "I've been carrying this for 3 years," Morrison said, holding up the device, waiting for the right moment to use it. He pressed the record button. "My name is Detective Sergeant Jake Morrison, badge number 4847. Today's date is October 15th. I want to confess to my role in the death of Carlos Rodriguez and the subsequent cover-up of his murder." Maya stared at Morrison in shock as he began to speak into the recorder. His voice was steady, professional, as if he were giving testimony in court. "In 2016, I was taking regular payments from Vincent Torres in exchange for information about pending police operations in the Aurora area. My partner at the time, Detective Richard Brennan, had initiated the arrangement, but I was a willing participant. On March 8, 2016, Carlos Rodriguez witnessed me accepting a payment from Torres outside Torres's auto repair shop." Morrison paused, looking at Maya. Torres panicked when he realized Carlos had seen the exchange. Instead of reporting the incident to us, Torres made the decision to eliminate Carlos as a potential witness. 2 days later, Carlos Rodriguez was shot and killed. Maya's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold the gun steady. This was everything she'd wanted to hear, the confession that would finally bring justice for Carlos. But something about Morrison's willingness to admit everything felt wrong. After Carlos's murder, Morrison continued into the recorder. "Detective Brennan and I deliberately sabotaged the investigation to prevent it from leading back to our arrangement with Torres. We failed to interview key witnesses, ignored physical evidence, and filed false reports designed to make the case appear unsolvable." Morrison stopped recording and looked at Maya. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" Maya's anger flared. "Don't act like you're doing me a favor. You destroyed my family. You let my brother's killer walk free for 8 years. Torres didn't walk free," Morrison said quietly. "He was killed 6 months after Carlos died, shot by a rival dealer in an unrelated dispute." "That's not justice," Maya said. "That's just more violence." Morrison nodded. "You're right. There's no justice in any of this. Carlos is still dead. Your family is still broken. And my confession doesn't change any of that." Maya felt her carefully constructed plan falling apart. She'd expected Morrison to resist, to deny everything, to give her a reason to hate him completely. His willingness to confess and accept responsibility was making it impossible for her to see him as the monster she'd imagined. "Why?" Maya asked. "Why are you making this so easy?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain. "Because I've been living with this guilt for 8 years. Because I've spent every day since Carlos died trying to make up for what I did. Because I know that nothing I've done since then can balance the scales." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. "You think being a good cop now makes up for being a corrupt cop then?" "No," Morrison said. "I don't think anything can make up for it. But I had 2 choices after Carlos died. I could let the guilt destroy me, or I could try to honor his memory by doing better." Maya's anger was being replaced by something more complicated, a mixture of grief, frustration, and confusion that she didn't know how to process. "Every case I've worked on since then, I've thought about Carlos," Morrison continued. "Every family I've helped get justice, every killer I've put away, every kid I've kept off the streets. It's all been an attempt to pay a debt I can never fully repay." Maya lowered the gun slightly, That's not enough. It's not fair that you get to redeem yourself while Carlos stays dead. You're right, Morrison said. It's not fair. None of this is fair. But that's the world we live in. A world where good people die and bad people sometimes get second chances they don't deserve. Maya raised the gun again, pointing it at Morrison's chest. Maybe it's time to balance those scales. Morrison didn't flinch. Maybe it is. If that's what you need to find peace, then go ahead. Pull the trigger. Maya's finger tightened on the trigger, but something held her back. Aren't you afraid to die? Morrison considered the question. I've been afraid of this moment for 8 years. Afraid that someone would discover what I'd done, that I'd have to face the consequences. But now that it's here, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm tired, Maya. I'm tired of carrying this guilt, tired of trying to make amends for something that can't be fixed. Maya stared at Morrison through her tears. I hate you. I know, Morrison said gently. You should hate me. I hate me too. The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of rain and Maya's ragged breathing. She'd come here planning to extract a confession and destroy Morrison's life, but she hadn't prepared for this, for Morrison to willingly give her everything she wanted while simultaneously making it impossible for her to take it. What happens now? Maya asked. Morrison gestured to the recorder in his hand. That depends on you. You have my confession. You can take it to Internal Affairs, to the FBI, to the media. My career is over either way. Maya looked at the recorder, then back at Morrison. And if I don't shoot you, what then? You go back to being Detective Morrison, helping other families get justice while mine never did? Morrison shook his head. No, even without the recording becoming public, I can't keep doing this job. I've been living a lie for too long. It's time for me to face the consequences, whether that's prison, disgrace, or death. Maya felt the weight of the gun in her hands, the weight of 8 years of anger and grief and unanswered questions. She thought about Carlos, about what he would want her to do. Her brother had been gentle, forgiving, always willing to see the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Carlos wouldn't want me to kill you, Maya said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Morrison's expression softened. No, he wouldn't. From what I remember about him, Carlos would want justice, not revenge. Maya's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold the gun. 8 years of planning, of investigation, of preparing for this moment, and she couldn't pull the trigger. Not because Morrison didn't deserve it, but because killing him wouldn't bring Carlos back or heal her family's wounds. I can't do it, Maya whispered, the gun wavering in her grip. Morrison took a step closer, his hand still raised. It's okay, Maya. You don't have to. You're not a killer. You're someone who seeks justice through truth, not violence. Maya tried to steady the gun, to summon the rage that had sustained her through years of investigation. But all she felt now was exhaustion, sadness, and a terrible emptiness where her anger used to be. I wanted you to suffer, Maya said, tears streaming down her face. I wanted you to feel what my family felt. I have suffered, Morrison said quietly, every day for 8 years, and I'll keep suffering for the rest of my life. That doesn't make it equal, but it's the truth. Maya aimed the gun at Morrison's chest one more time, her finger on the trigger, her heart pounding. This was her moment of justice, her chance to balance the scales that had been tilted against her family for so long. But as lightning illuminated Morrison's face, Maya saw something that made her hesitate. He wasn't afraid. He was at peace, ready to accept whatever consequences she chose to impose. Maya pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, reverberating off the concrete walls and broken windows. Maya's ears rang from the blast, and for a moment she couldn't see anything through the smoke and her own tears. When her vision cleared, she expected to see Morrison on the ground, bleeding, dying. Instead, he was still standing exactly where He'd been before, completely unharmed. A chunk of concrete had exploded from the wall 3 feet to his left, leaving a crater where Maya's bullet had struck. Morrison looked at the damaged wall, then back at Maya, and that's when he said it. "Your aim's bad, but your timing's perfect." Maya stared at him in confusion, the gun still smoking in her trembling hands. "What are you talking about?" Morrison slowly lowered his hands and pulled out his cell phone. Maya tensed, thinking he might be calling for backup, but instead he showed her the screen. It displayed a text message he'd been in the middle of typing. When she'd confronted him, the message read, "Internal Affairs, I need to schedule a meeting. I have information about corruption in the department, including my own involvement. Time to come clean." "I was about to send this when you stepped out of the shadows," Morrison said, putting his phone away. "I've been trying to work up the courage. For 3 years. Tonight was supposed to be the night I finally did it." Maya lowered the gun, her mind reeling. "You were going to confess anyway?" Morrison nodded. "I couldn't live with it anymore. The guilt was eating me alive, and I realized that trying to make amends through good police work wasn't enough. I needed to face the consequences directly." Maya felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "But why tonight? Why now?" Morrison gestured around the empty warehouse. "Because of you. I've been watching you investigate your brother's case. I knew you were getting close to the truth. I've seen you at community meetings, watched you following me, noticed you asking questions about the old cases Brennan and I worked on." Maya's eyes widened. "You knew I was investigating you?" "For months," Morrison confirmed. "You're good at surveillance, but I've been a cop for 15 years. I know when someone's watching me. I knew it was only a matter of time before you found the evidence you needed." Maya felt a surge of anger mixed with embarrassment. "And you just let me waste all that time? You could have saved me months of work if you'd just confessed earlier." Morrison shook his head. "It wouldn't have meant anything coming from me alone. You needed to discover the truth yourself, to see the evidence with your own eyes. A confession without proof is just words. You need the documentation, the bank records, the witness statements. You needed to be absolutely certain." Maya looked down at the gun in her hands, feeling foolish. "So what was the point of all this? If you were already planning to confess, why did I even need to be here?" "Because," Morrison said gently, "you deserve to hear it first. Before Internal Affairs, before the media, before anyone else, Carlos's family deserved to know the truth directly from me." Maya felt tears starting again. "You don't get to make that decision for my family. You don't get to control how this plays out." "You're right," Morrison said. "That's why I'm giving you a choice. You can take my confession to whoever you want, however you want. You can destroy my career publicly. You can demand that I face criminal charges. You can tell the whole world what kind of cop I really was, or ... Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand. "Or what?" Morrison reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a thick manila folder. "Or you can let me do this the right way. Turn myself in officially. Cooperate fully with the investigation. Testify against anyone else who was involved in the corruption network." Maya stared at the folder. "What's in there?" "Everything," Morrison said. "Names, dates, amounts of money, locations of meetings. Not just about me and Brennan, but about the whole network of corrupt cops who were working with Torres and other dealers. Information that could bring down a dozen dirty officers and maybe prevent other families from going through what yours did." Maya set the gun down on a nearby crate and took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of documents, photocopied. Bank records, transcripts of recorded conversations, photographs of meetings between police officers and known criminals. "You've been building a case against your own colleagues?" Maya asked, flipping through the papers. Morrison nodded. "Once I realized I couldn't live with what I'd done, I started documenting everything I could remember about the corruption network. It took me 2 years to gather all of this. Maya found a photograph of Detective Brennan accepting an envelope from Vincent Torres. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the faces were unmistakable. "You took this?" Maya asked. 6 months before I planned to turn it all in, Morrison said. Brennan didn't know I was building a case against him too. He thought I was still his loyal partner, keeping quiet to save my own skin. Maya continued reading through the documents, her anger gradually being replaced by something approaching. Amazement. The folder contained evidence of systematic corruption that went far beyond what she'd discovered in her own investigation. "There are at least 8 other officers involved," Morrison continued. "Some of them are still active, still taking bribes, still putting cases at risk. If this information goes public the right way, through official channels, it could clean up a lot of the department's problems." Maya looked up at Morrison. "And if it goes public the wrong way?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Then some of these guys might destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or just disappear entirely. Corruption cases are tricky. You usually only get one chance to make the charges stick." Maya closed the folder and hugged it to her chest. "So, what you're really asking is for me to trust you. After 8 years of lies and cover-ups, you want me to believe that you're suddenly committed to doing the right thing." "I know how it sounds," Morrison said. "I know I have no right to ask for your trust. But I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for all the other families who might end up like yours if we don't handle this properly." Maya felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She'd come here planning simple revenge, shoot Morrison, or at least destroy his life in retaliation for what he'd done to hers. Now she was being asked to consider the broader implications, to think about justice for people she'd never met. "What about Carlos?" Maya asked. "What about justice for my brother?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Carlos's death will always be on my conscience. Nothing I do now can change that. But maybe we can prevent other people from dying the same way he did." Maya looked around the warehouse, at the broken windows and rusted equipment, at the gun she'd set aside and the confession she'd extracted. Everything felt surreal, like she was trapped in someone else's story. "I don't know if I can do this," Maya said. "I don't know if I can just forgive you and walk away." "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Morrison said. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm asking you to help me do something that might honor Carlos's memory." Maya thought about her brother, about the kind of person he'd been. Carlos had always wanted to help people, had dreamed of becoming a social worker or maybe a teacher. He would have hated the idea that his death had led to more corruption, more violence, more families being destroyed. "If I agree to this," Maya said slowly, "what happens to you?" Morrison shrugged. "Prison, probably. I'll lose my pension, my career, my reputation. I'll be known as a dirty cop who helped cover up a murder. That's what I deserve." Maya picked up her gun and checked the safety. "And what happens to me?" "That depends on what you want," Morrison said. "You could testify at the trials, help make sure everyone involved faces justice. Or you could walk away and let the system handle it from here." Maya felt exhausted suddenly, drained by months of investigation and years of anger. "I wanted to hate you. It would have been so much easier if you'd been the monster I thought you were." Morrison smiled sadly. "I am a monster, Maya. I just happen to be a monster who's tired of being one." Maya walked over to where Morrison was standing and looked him directly in the eyes. "If I find out you're lying to me, if this is just another cover-up, I will come back and finish what I started tonight." Morrison nodded solemnly. "I understand. And I promise you, this is real. No more lies, no more cover-ups." Maya extended her hand. "Give me your phone." Morrison handed over his cell phone without hesitation. Maya scrolled to the draft message he'd shown her earlier and pressed send. The text to Internal Affairs went out immediately. "There," Maya said, handing the phone back. No turning back now. Morrison looked at his phone, then back at Maya. Thank you. Maya shouldered her bag and picked up the folder of evidence. Don't thank me yet. We'll see if you actually follow through on all these promises. As Maya walked toward the warehouse exit, Morrison called after her. Maya, wait. She turned around. I know this doesn't change anything, Morrison said, but I want you to know that Carlos was a good kid. The investigation I read showed that he was walking home from work, minding his own business, trying to do right by his family. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Maya felt fresh tears threatening. No, he didn't. I've spent 8 years trying to be the kind of cop Carlos would have respected, Morrison continued. I know that doesn't matter to you, but it mattered to me. Maya nodded silently and walked out into the rain. Behind her, she could hear Morrison making another phone call, probably to his lawyer or maybe to Internal Affairs directly. As Maya sat in her car, watching rain streak down the windshield, she realized that her 8-year quest for justice was finally over. Not in the way she'd expected, not with the satisfaction of revenge she'd thought she wanted, but with something more complex and uncertain. Morrison's confession would destroy his career and probably send him to prison. The evidence he'd given her would bring down other corrupt cops and maybe prevent future corruption. But Carlos would still be dead, her family would still be broken, and Maya would still have to figure out how to live with all the anger she'd carried for so long. She looked down at the folder in her lap, filled with evidence that could change dozens of lives. Maya Rodriguez, the forensic accountant who'd spent her career following money trails and solving puzzles, now held the biggest puzzle of all: how to balance justice with mercy, revenge with redemption. Maya started her car and drove away from the warehouse, leaving Morrison alone with his phone calls and his conscience. Tomorrow she would decide what to do with the evidence he'd given her. Tonight she just wanted to go home and call her parents, to tell them that someone had finally taken responsibility for Carlos's death. That wasn't the ending she'd planned, but maybe it was the ending Carlos would have wanted. Maya drove through the rain-soaked streets of Chicago, carrying the weight of justice in a manila folder, and the memory of a gunshot that missed its target, but hit its mark in ways she was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Maya sat in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. Across from her, Special Agent Rebecca Chen reviewed the thick stack of documents Maya had brought, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. This is extraordinary, Agent Chen said, looking up from Morrison's files. We've been investigating corruption in the Chicago PD for 2 years, and Detective Morrison just handed us more actionable intelligence than we've gathered in all that time. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. So you believe it's all legitimate? He's not just making things up to save himself? Agent Chun shook her head. We've already started cross-referencing his information with our existing investigations. So far, everything checks out. The bank records, the meeting locations, the names, it all correlates with evidence we'd been struggling to connect. Maya had spent sleepless nights since leaving the warehouse, wrestling with whether to trust Morrison or expose him publicly. Ultimately, she decided to bring the evidence to the FBI first, figuring that federal agents would be less likely to be compromised by local corruption. What happens to Morrison now? Maya asked. Agent Chun consulted her notes. He's cooperating fully with our investigation. His attorney worked out a plea agreement. Morrison will testify against the other officers involved in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's looking at probably 3 to 5 years instead of the 15 to 20 he could have faced. Maya felt a familiar surge of anger. So he gets rewarded for finally telling the truth? I understand your frustration, Agent Chun said gently. But without Morrison's cooperation, we might never have been able to build cases against the other corrupt officers. Sometimes the system requires these kinds of compromises to achieve the greater good. Maya stared out the conference room window at the Chicago skyline. Even now, knowing that justice was finally being served, she couldn't shake the feeling that Carlos had been cheated somehow. Agent Chun seemed to sense Maya's internal struggle. Your brother's case is being officially reopened. With Morrison's confession and the new evidence, we can finally close that investigation properly. What about Torres? Maya asked. He's dead, so he'll never face trial for actually pulling the trigger. No, but we're investigating his associates who might have been involved in the conspiracy. There's a chance we can bring additional charges related to your brother's murder. Maya nodded, though the prospect of more trials and investigations felt exhausting rather than satisfying. She'd gotten what she wanted, acknowledgement of the truth, consequences for those responsible, but somehow it felt incomplete. There's something else, Agent Chun continued. Morrison specifically requested that any restitution payments go to your family. He's waiving his rights to his police pension and directing those funds to you. Maya's eyebrows raised. I don't want his money. It's not about what he wants to give, Agent Chun explained. It's about what your family lost. Your father's drinking problems, your mother's medical expenses from the stress-related health issues, your own student loans from putting yourself through college. Morrison's corruption had real financial consequences for your family. Maya hadn't thought about the monetary aspect of their suffering. She'd been so focused on emotional justice that she'd overlooked the practical ways Carlos's death had devastated their family's finances. How much money are we talking about? Maya asked. Agent Chun consulted another document. Morrison's pension value plus accumulated interest comes to approximately $400,000. It won't undo the damage, but it might help your parents with their remaining debts and medical bills. Maya felt overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. Part of her wanted to reject Morrison's money, to maintain the moral high ground by refusing anything that came from his tainted career. But another part of her thought about her father, who'd never fully recovered from his alcoholism, and her mother, who still struggled with anxiety and depression 8 years after Carlos's death. I need time to think about it, Maya said. Agent Chun nodded. Of course, there's no rush on that decision. Maya gathered her purse and stood to leave, but Agent Chun stopped her with one more question. Have you spoken to Detective Morrison since that night in the warehouse? Maya shook her head. No, I haven't seen him or talked to him. He's been asking about you, Agent Chun said. Asking if you're okay, if you need anything. I think he genuinely cares about how this is affecting you. Maya felt a complicated mix of emotions. He doesn't care about me. He lost that right 8 years ago. Agent Chun gathered her files. Maybe. But sometimes people change, and sometimes they deserve a chance to make amends. Maya left the FBI office feeling more confused than when she'd arrived. She'd expected that bringing Morrison to justice would provide closure, but instead it had opened up new questions about forgiveness, redemption, and what she owed to both her dead brother and her living family. That evening, Maya drove to Mount Carmel Cemetery for the first time in over a year. She'd avoided visiting Carlos's grave during her investigation, afraid that seeing his headstone would either weaken her resolve or push her toward action she might regret. Carlos's grave was in the older section of the cemetery, marked by a simple granite headstone that read, Carlos Miguel Rodriguez, beloved son and brother, 1992 to 2016. Maya had helped choose the inscription when she was 18. Still reeling from shock and grief, Maya sat cross-legged on the grass next to the grave, ignoring the dampness that soaked through her jeans. I found them, Carlos, she said quietly. I found the people who killed you and covered it up. Morrison confessed to everything. A cool October breeze rustled the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery. Maya had never been someone who believed in signs or messages from beyond, but sitting there in the fading light, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. I don't know if you'd approve of what I did, Maya continued. I wanted to kill him, you know. I really wanted to make him suffer the way our family suffered. But when it came down to it, I couldn't do it. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled to a news article she'd bookmarked. The headline read, "Federal Investigation Exposes Widespread Corruption in Chicago Police Department." Morrison's name was mentioned prominently as a cooperating witness whose information had led to multiple arrests. "He's helping now," Maya said to the headstone. "Morrison is trying to fix some of the damage he caused. I know that doesn't bring you back, but maybe it prevents other families from going through what we did." Maya spent another hour at the cemetery, talking to Carlos about everything that had happened since his death. She told him about college, about her career, about their parents' struggles and slow recovery. She told him about the long nights she'd spent investigating his murder, about the anger that had sustained her through years of searching for answers. Finally, as darkness began to fall, Maya stood up and brushed the grass off her clothes. "I love you, big brother," she said. "I'm going to try to let go of the anger now. I think that's what you'd want me to do." 2 days later, Maya received an unexpected phone call at work. Her assistant informed her that Detective Morrison was in the lobby, asking to speak with her. Maya's first instinct was to refuse the meeting, but curiosity won out. She instructed her assistant to send Morrison up to her office. Morrison looked different than he had in the warehouse. He was wearing civilian clothes instead of his police uniform, and he appeared to have lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something more tentative. "Thank you for seeing me," Morrison said, taking the seat Maya gestured to across from her desk. "What do you want?" Maya asked, keeping her tone professional but cold. Morrison pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on Maya's desk. "I wanted to give you this personally." Maya opened the envelope and found a single sheet of paper inside. It was a resignation letter dated 3 days earlier, addressed to the Chicago Police Department. "You quit?" Maya asked. Morrison nodded. "I couldn't keep wearing the badge after what I'd done. Even with the plea agreement, even with the cooperation, I didn't deserve to be a police officer anymore." Maya set the letter aside. "So what will you do now?" "I don't know," Morrison admitted. "Find a job somewhere, serve my sentence when the time comes. Try to build a life that doesn't depend on hiding from the truth." Maya studied Morrison's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All she saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. "The FBI told me about the pension money," Maya said. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I know you probably don't want it, but I thought your family should have some compensation for what they went through." Maya had been wrestling with the decision about the money for days. Her pride told her to reject it, but her practical side recognized how much it could help her parents. "I'll accept it," Maya said finally, "but not for me. For my parents. They deserve some financial security after everything they've been through." Morrison looked relieved. "Thank you. I was hoping you'd see it that way." Maya leaned back in her chair. "Is that why you came here? To make sure I'd take the money?" Morrison shook his head. "I came to apologize. I know it doesn't change anything, and I know you don't owe me forgiveness, but I needed to say it directly to you." Maya waited for Morrison to continue. "I'm sorry for the role I played in Carlos's death," Morrison said. "I'm sorry for the cover-up that followed. I'm sorry for the pain my actions caused your family. And I'm sorry it took me 8 years to find the courage to take responsibility." Maya felt tears starting, but she blinked them back. "Your apology doesn't bring my brother back." "No, it doesn't," Morrison agreed. "Nothing can do that. But I wanted you to know that Carlos's death changed me. It forced me to confront what kind of person I really was, and to try to become someone better." Maya stood up and walked to her office window, looking out at the Chicago streets below. "Agent Chun said you've been asking about me." Morrison was quiet for a moment. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I know this whole process has been difficult for you too. Maya turned back to face Morrison. Why do you care? You got what you wanted, a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. You don't need to worry about me anymore. Morrison met her gaze steadily. Because Carlos was your brother, and you loved him. Because you spent 8 years seeking justice for him when the system failed you. Because you deserve to find peace after everything you've been through. Maya felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I don't know how to find peace. I got the confession I wanted. I got the investigation reopened. I got justice for Carlos. But I still feel angry, and I still feel empty. Morrison nodded. I think that's normal. Closure isn't the same thing as healing, and healing takes time. Maya returned to her desk and sat down. What made you finally decide to confess? Really? Morrison considered the question carefully. Watching you investigate the case. Seeing how much you cared about finding the truth. How determined you were to get justice for Carlos. It reminded me that there are people like you in the world. People who don't give up. Who don't compromise their principles for convenience. Maya felt an unexpected surge of something that might have been gratitude. So you're saying I inspired you to do the right thing? Morrison smiled slightly. In a way, yes. You showed me what real integrity looks like. I realized I wanted to be worthy of the faith Carlos's family had placed in the justice system, even if that system had failed you. Maya looked at Morrison. Across her desk, this man who had been both the villain and the unexpected ally in her quest for justice. She still felt anger toward him, probably always would. But she also felt something else, a recognition that people could change, that redemption was possible even in the darkest circumstances. I need you to understand something, Maya said. I will never forgive you for what you did to my family. But I can respect what you're doing now to try to make it right, Morrison nodded. That's more than I deserve, and I'm grateful for it. Maya stood up, indicating that the meeting was over. I hope you find a way to live with what you've done. And I hope the other families affected by this corruption get the justice they deserve. Morrison stood as well and headed for the door. As he reached for the handle, he turned back one more time. Maya, for what it's worth, Carlos would be proud of you. You never gave up on him, and you never compromised your principles to get revenge. That takes a kind of strength most people don't have. After Morrison left, Maya sat alone in her office, staring at his resignation letter. Outside her window, Chicago continued its daily rhythm. People going to work, students heading to class, families navigating the complicated business of living. Maya picked up her phone and called her mother. Mama, it's me, Maya said when Carmen Rodriguez answered. I have something to tell you about Carlos's case. Something good. 6 months later, Maya stood in a packed federal courtroom watching Detective Sergeant Robert Daniels being led away in handcuffs. Daniels was the 7th corrupt officer to be convicted, based on Morrison's testimony and the evidence Maya had helped bring to light. The prosecution had been swift and thorough, dismantling a corruption network that had operated for over a decade. Maya's parents sat beside her in the gallery. Her father, Miguel, had been sober for 4 months now, the longest stretch since Carlos's death. Her mother, Carmen, clutched a small photo of Carlos that she'd brought to every court hearing. Justice for our boy, Carmen whispered as Daniels disappeared through the courtroom doors. Finally, justice. Maya squeezed her mother's hand. The trials had been difficult for the family, requiring them to relive Carlos's death repeatedly as prosecutors built their cases. But they'd also been healing in an unexpected way, providing a sense that Carlos's death hadn't been meaningless. Outside the courthouse, Maya was approached by a young woman with a notebook and press credentials. Miss Rodriguez, I'm Sarah Walsh from the Chicago Tribune. Could I ask you a few questions about your role in exposing this corruption? Maya had given several interviews over the past few months, though she'd tried to keep a low profile. The media had been fascinated by the story of a forensic accountant who'd spent 8 years investigating her brother's murder and ultimately brought down a police corruption ring. "I'm not really comfortable being called a hero," Maya said to the reporter. "I was just trying to find out what happened to my brother." Sarah Walsh scribbled notes quickly. "But your investigation led to the conviction of 8 corrupt officers and the reopening of dozens of cases that had been compromised. How does it feel to know you've had such an impact?" Maya considered the question. "It feels incomplete. Carlos is still dead, and nothing we've accomplished in these courtrooms brings him back. But maybe other families won't have to go through what mine did." After the reporter left, Maya walked with her parents to their car. The financial restitution from Morrison's pension had allowed them to move back to a nicer neighborhood, and Miguel had been able to afford a treatment program that seemed to be working. "Mia," Miguel said as they reached the parking garage, "your mother and I want to talk to you about something." Maya looked between her parents, noting the serious expressions on their faces. Carmen pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse. "We received this letter yesterday. From Detective Morrison." Maya's stomach tightened. She hadn't spoken to Morrison since their meeting in her office 6 months earlier, though she'd followed his legal proceedings through Agent Chun. "What does he say?" Maya asked reluctantly. Miguel unfolded the letter. "He's being transferred to a federal prison in Indiana next month to begin his sentence. He wanted to invite us to visit him before he goes, to answer any questions we might have." Maya frowned. "You don't have to do that. You don't owe him anything." Carmen took the letter back from her husband. "We know we don't owe him anything. But we've been talking, your father and I, and we think maybe we need to see him, for our own peace." Maya felt protective of her parents. They'd been through enough trauma without having to face the man who'd helped cover up their son's murder. "Mama, you don't have to put yourself through that," Maya said gently. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. 8 years, Maya. 8 years I've been angry and sad and broken. I need to look at this man and see if I can find a way to let go of some of that anger." Miguel nodded. "The grief counselor at the church says sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from carrying so much pain." Maya understood what her parents were saying, but she wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of encounter. Seeing Morrison in her office had been difficult enough, and that was on her terms, in her space. "Would you come with us?" Carmen asked. "I think it would be easier if we were all together." Maya looked at her parents' hopeful faces and realized she couldn't say no. They'd supported her through 8 years of investigation and 6 months of trials. If they needed this confrontation to find peace, she would be there for them. "Okay," Maya said. "I'll come with you." 3 days later, Maya sat with her parents in a sterile visiting room at the Cook County Jail. Morrison entered wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner than when Maya had last seen him, and there was a quiet resignation in his demeanor. A guard removed Morrison's handcuffs and gestured for him to sit across from the Rodriguez family. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Carmen broke the silence. "Detective Morrison, thank you for agreeing to see us." Morrison's voice was hoarse when he replied, "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Miguel leaned forward in his chair. "We came because we have questions. Things we need to understand." Morrison nodded. "I'll answer anything you want to know." Carmen pulled out a small photo of Carlos from her purse and placed it on the table between them. "This is our son. This is the boy who died because of what you did." Morrison stared at the photo for a long time. Maya could see his hands trembling slightly. "He looks like Maya," Morrison said quietly. "Same eyes, same smile." Carmen wiped away a tear. "Carlos was going to be a teacher. He wanted to work with kids in our neighborhood, help them stay in school, keep them away from gangs." Morrison closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." I know those words don't mean much, but I'm so sorry for what my actions cost him, cost all of you. Miguel's voice was steady but filled with emotion. We need to understand how this happened. How did you become the kind of police officer who would let our son's killer go free? Morrison was quiet for several minutes, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was young and stupid and thought I deserved more than my paycheck. Brennan approached me when I was going through a rough time. My mother was sick. I had gambling debts. I felt like the department didn't appreciate me. He made it seem like everyone was doing it, like taking money from dealers was just part of the job. Carmen leaned forward. But you knew it was wrong. Morrison nodded. I knew it was wrong. But I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that we were just getting paid for information the criminals would find out anyway. I rationalized it until I almost believed my own lies. Maya spoke for the first time since entering the visiting room. What about after Carlos was killed? How did you rationalize covering up a murder? Morrison looked directly at Maya. I can't rationalize it. There's no excuse for what Brennan and I did after Carlos died. We were scared and selfish, and we chose to protect ourselves instead of seeking justice for your brother. Miguel reached across the table and picked up Carlos's photo. Do you think about him, about our son? Morrison's composure finally cracked, and tears began streaming down his face. Every day. I think about him every single day. I think about the life he should have had, the students he should have taught, the family he should have raised. Carmen watched Morrison cry and felt something shift inside her chest. She'd expected to feel satisfaction seeing the man who'd destroyed her family break down, but instead she felt a complicated mixture of sadness and something that might have been compassion. What will you do when you get out of prison? Carmen asked. Morrison wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't know. I'll never be a police officer again. Maybe I'll find work helping other people who've been affected by police corruption. Maybe I'll volunteer with victims' families. I need to find a way to spend the rest of my life making amends. Maya felt her own eyes filling with tears. Making amends won't bring Carlos back. Morrison met her gaze. No, it won't. But maybe it can prevent other families from losing someone the way you lost Carlos. The visiting hour was nearly over when Carmen reached across the table and placed her hand on Morrison's. I forgive you, she said simply. Morrison stared at her in shock. Maya felt her own surprise at her mother's words. Mama, Maya started, but Carmen held up her other hand. I forgive you, Carmen repeated to Morrison, not because you deserve it, but because I can't carry this anger anymore. It's been poisoning my heart for 8 years, and I need to let it go. Morrison broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. Miguel reached over and put his arm around his wife. That doesn't mean we're friends, Carmen continued gently. That doesn't mean what you did was okay. But I choose to forgive you so that I can heal. Maya watched her parents comfort each other while Morrison struggled to compose himself. She felt a profound admiration for her mother's strength and grace, even as she wasn't sure she could make the same choice. The guard announced that visiting time was over. As Morrison stood to leave, he looked at each member of the Rodriguez family. Thank you, he said to Carmen. Your forgiveness is a gift I don't deserve, but I'll try to be worthy of it. To Miguel, he said, I hope you continue to stay sober. Carlos would want his father to be healthy and strong. Finally, Morrison turned to Maya. I know you can't forgive me, and I understand why. But I want you to know that your courage in seeking the truth inspired me to finally do the right thing. Carlos would be proud of the woman you've become. After Morrison was led away, the Rodriguez family sat in their car outside the jail for a long time without speaking. Finally, Miguel broke the silence. How do you feel, mi amor? He asked Carmen. Carmen stared out the windshield at the gray Chicago skyline, lighter Like I've been carrying a heavy bag for 8 years, and I finally got to put it down. Maya turned to look at her mother. How were you able to do that? How were you able to forgive him? Carmen smiled sadly. Because holding on to that anger was killing me slowly. Because our priest told me that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing your own heart. And because I realized that Carlos wouldn't want his death to destroy our family with bitterness. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. She was proud of her mother's strength and grace, but she wasn't sure she was ready to let go of her own anger. I don't think I can forgive him, Maya said honestly. Carmen reached back and took her daughter's hand. That's okay, Mia. Forgiveness isn't something you can force. It has to come naturally, in its own time. Maybe you'll never forgive him, and that's your right. Miguel started the car. What matters is that we found the truth. Carlos's story is finally complete, and the people responsible are being held accountable. As they drove home through the city where Carlos had lived and died, Maya reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this point. The investigation that had started with her brother's murder had grown into something much larger, a reckoning with corruption that had affected dozens of families, a quest for justice that had transformed her entire understanding of right and wrong. Maya still carried anger toward Morrison, and she probably always would. But she also carried something else now, a sense that justice could take many forms, that healing was possible even when forgiveness wasn't, and that sometimes the most important victories were the ones that prevented future tragedies rather than avenging past ones. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment looking through a box of Carlos's belongings that her parents had given her years earlier. She found his high school yearbook, filled with messages from friends who'd believed in his dreams of becoming a teacher. One message, from his girlfriend at the time, read, "Carlos, you always see the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. That's going to make you an amazing teacher someday." Maya closed the yearbook and thought about Morrison, sitting in his jail cell, trying to figure out how to spend the rest of his life making amends for his mistakes. She thought about her mother's decision to forgive and her own decision to hold on to her anger. Maybe they were both right. Maybe justice was big enough to encompass both forgiveness and accountability, both mercy and consequences. Maya picked up her phone and dialed Agent Chun's number. "Rebecca, it's Maya Rodriguez. I wanted to ask you about something. Are there other families out there dealing with cases that might have been compromised by police corruption? Families who might need help navigating the system?" Agent Chun sounded intrigued. "There are several. Why do you ask?" Maya looked at Carlos's photo on her mantelpiece. "Because I think I found my next case." 2 years after Morrison began his federal prison sentence, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at Northwestern University Law School. She'd been invited to speak about police accountability and victim advocacy as part of their criminal justice reform seminar. The irony wasn't lost on her. The girl who'd once planned to kill a corrupt cop was now teaching future lawyers about systematic approaches to justice. "When I first discovered that police officers had covered up my brother's murder," Maya told the audience of law students and professors, "I wanted revenge. I wanted to make them suffer the way my family had suffered. That desire for vengeance consumed 8 years of my life." Maya clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing a photo of the abandoned warehouse where she'd confronted Morrison. "I came very close to destroying my life in pursuit of that revenge. If my aim had been better that night, I would have committed murder and spent the rest of my life in prison. But sometimes the universe has a different plan." A student in the front row raised her hand. "What changed your mind about taking revenge?" Maya considered the question. "I realized that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. Revenge is about making yourself feel better by hurting someone else. Justice is about creating systemic change that prevents future harm." Maya had founded the Carlos Rodriguez Foundation 18 months earlier. using the settlement money from Morrison's pension and donations from supporters who'd followed her story in the media. The foundation provided legal assistance and investigative support to families dealing with suspected police misconduct or corruption. In the past year alone, Maya's team had helped reopen 14 cold cases, exposed corruption in 3 different police departments, and secured millions of dollars in settlements for victims' families. The work was demanding and emotionally draining, but it gave Maya a sense of purpose that pure revenge never could have provided. After her Northwestern presentation, Maya was approached by a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and calloused hands. "Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Angela Martinez. My son David was killed 3 years ago in Milwaukee, and I think the police investigation was deliberately sabotaged." Maya had heard variations of this story dozens of times. Each case was unique, but they all shared common elements: families seeking answers, investigations that seemed incomplete or biased, and institutional resistance to accountability. "What makes you think the investigation was compromised?" Maya asked gently. Angela pulled out a thick folder from her bag. "David was going to testify against a drug dealer who'd been paying off cops in our neighborhood. 2 days before the trial, David was found dead in an alley. The police said it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was taken from him." Maya accepted the folder and flipped through police reports, witness statements, and newspaper clippings. Even at first glance, she could see red flags, interviews that should have been conducted but weren't, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared, witnesses who'd never been contacted. "Have you tried working with internal affairs or federal agencies?" Maya asked. Angela's laugh was bitter. "Internal affairs said there wasn't enough evidence of misconduct. The FBI said it was a local matter. Everyone keeps passing the buck. And meanwhile, David's killer is walking free." Maya handed Angela her business card. "Send me copies of everything you have. I can't promise we'll be able to help, but I can promise someone will actually look at your son's case." Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You're the first person in 3 years who's taken me seriously." After Angela left, Maya drove back to her foundation's offices in downtown Chicago. The Carlos Rodriguez Foundation operated out of a converted warehouse in the West Loop, with a staff of 12 including investigators, lawyers, victim advocates, and forensic accountants. Maya's assistant, Jennifer Walsh, the former Tribune reporter who'd covered the corruption trials, met her at the door with a stack of messages. "Agent Chun called from the FBI," Jennifer said. "She wants to discuss a multi-state corruption investigation that might benefit from our input. And you have 3 new intake appointments this afternoon." Maya had hired Jennifer after the reporter had expressed interest in transitioning from journalism to advocacy work. Jennifer's investigative skills and media contacts had proven invaluable in exposing corruption and building public pressure for reform. "What about the Morrison situation?" Maya asked as they walked to her office. Jennifer consulted her notes. "He's scheduled for release next month. His lawyer sent over the address where he'll be staying, a halfway house in Rockford. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet with him." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Morrison had written to her several times during his incarceration, updating her on his legal status and expressing continued remorse for his actions. Maya had never responded to the letters, though she'd read each one carefully. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Maya said honestly. Jennifer nodded. "His lawyer said there was no pressure. Morrison just wanted you to know he was available if you ever wanted to talk." Maya settled into her office chair and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked different to her now than it had during her years of investigation. Instead of seeing it as a place where corruption flourished and justice was denied, she now saw it as a place where change was possible, where determined people could make a difference. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Hola, Mama," Maya answered. "Mia, I have news," Carmen said, her voice excited. "Your father got the job." Maya smiled. Miguel had been interviewing for a position as a construction supervisor with a company that specialized in building affordable housing. The job would give him a chance to use his skills while contributing to something meaningful. "That's wonderful," Maya said. "How's he feeling about it?" "Nervous but excited. He says it feels good to be building something instead of just trying to survive each day." Maya's parents had both made remarkable progress in their healing journey. Miguel had been sober for over a year now and was attending meetings regularly. Carmen had returned to volunteering at their church and had started a support group for mothers who'd lost children to violence. "There's something else," Carmen continued. "Detective Morrison sent us another letter." Maya tensed. "What did he say this time?" "He wanted us to know he's being released soon, and he's planning to move back to Chicago to work with organizations that help victims of police misconduct. He wanted to ask our permission before returning to the city." Maya was surprised by Morrison's consideration. "What did you tell him?" Carmen was quiet for a moment. "I told him that Chicago is his home too, and that if he's sincere about helping people, then he should do what he thinks is right." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her appreciated Morrison's respectful approach to returning to the city where he'd committed his crimes. Another part of her worried about how she'd feel encountering him in professional settings. "Do you think I should meet with him?" Maya asked her mother. Carmen considered the question carefully. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you, Mia. You don't owe him anything, but you also don't have to carry the burden of avoiding him forever." After ending the call with her mother, Maya spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing new cases and meeting with potential clients. Each story reinforced her belief that the Foundation's work was essential, but it also reminded her of how widespread the problems were. At 6 p.m., Maya was preparing to leave the office when Jennifer knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," Jennifer said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." Maya looked up to see a young woman, probably in her early 20s, standing nervously in the doorway. She had the same desperate look that Maya had seen in dozens of other family members seeking help. "My name is Lisa Torres," the woman said. "I think you knew my Uncle Vincent." Maya's blood turned cold. Vincent Torres was the drug dealer who'd killed Carlos, the man whose corruption payments had led to her brother's death. "I need your help," Lisa continued, seemingly unaware of Maya's shock. "My uncle was murdered 8 years ago, and I think the police covered it up. I think he was killed because he was going to expose corrupt cops." Maya stared at Lisa Torres, trying to process this unexpected development. The young woman looked nothing like the hardened criminal Maya had imagined when she'd thought about Vincent Torres over the years. Lisa was small, well-dressed, and spoke with the careful pronunciation of someone who'd worked hard to improve herself. "Sit down," Maya said finally, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Lisa sat down and pulled out a folder similar to the one Angela Martinez had shown Maya earlier that day. "I know my uncle wasn't a good person," Lisa said. "I know he sold drugs and hurt people. But he was still family, and I think he deserved justice too." Maya felt like she was in an alternate reality. The niece of the man who'd killed her brother was asking for her help in investigating his murder. "What makes you think the police covered up your uncle's death?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Lisa opened her folder and pulled out newspaper clippings about Vincent Torres' shooting. Uncle Vincent was killed by members of a rival drug crew, but the police never arrested anyone. They said it was gang violence and closed the case after 2 weeks. Maya remembered reading about Torres' death years earlier during her investigation. At the time, she'd felt a grim satisfaction that Carlos's killer had met a violent end. "But I found something," Lisa continued. "Uncle Vincent had been talking to someone before he died. Someone official. I think he was going to cooperate with law enforcement, and that's why he was killed." Lisa pulled out a cell phone record showing multiple calls between Vincent Torres and a number that was listed to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Maya studied the phone records, her mind racing. If Torres had been cooperating with prosecutors before his death, it would add another layer of complexity to the corruption case that had already consumed years of her life. "Why come to me?" Maya asked. "There are other organizations that investigate police misconduct." Lisa looked directly at Maya. "Because I know who you are. I know your brother Carlos was killed because of what my uncle did. I figured if anyone would want to know the whole truth about what happened, it would be you." Maya felt a strange sense of cosmic irony. The investigation that had started with her brother's death might not be complete until she helped solve the murder of the man who'd killed him. "I'll need time to think about this," Maya said carefully. Lisa nodded and stood up. "I understand. I know it's a lot to ask. But my uncle wasn't the only victim in this whole mess. Your brother wasn't either. I think there's a bigger story here that nobody's ever uncovered." After Lisa left, Maya sat alone in her office as darkness fell over Chicago. She thought about the warehouse confrontation 2 years earlier, about Morrison's confession and subsequent imprisonment, about her mother's decision to forgive and her own choice to build something positive from their tragedy. Maya had spent years believing that Vincent Torres was simply a killer who'd escaped justice until he was murdered by other criminals. The possibility that Torres had been trying to cooperate with law enforcement before his death changed everything. Maya picked up her phone and called Agent Chun. "Rebecca, it's Maya. I need to ask you about something. Were there any federal investigations into Chicago drug operations between 2016 and 2017? Something that might have involved someone named Vincent Torres?" Agent Chun was quiet for a moment. "That's an interesting question. Why do you ask?" Maya explained about Lisa Torres's visit and the phone records showing contact between Torres and the state's attorney's office. "I'll need to check some classified files," Agent Chun said. "But if Torres was cooperating with law enforcement, that would explain some gaps in our corruption investigation." Maya felt a familiar surge of investigative energy. "What kind of gaps?" "There were payments to corrupt officers that we could never trace back to their sources. If Torres was providing information about the police corruption network before he was killed, it might explain why certain evidence disappeared." Maya stared out her office window at the lights of Chicago. "So Torres might have been trying to make amends for what he'd done, including killing Carlos." "It's possible," Agent Chun said. "And if that's true, then his murder might have been orchestrated by the same corrupt officers who covered up your brother's death." Maya felt the weight of a new investigation settling on her shoulders. Just when she'd thought she'd found closure, the case was expanding again, drawing her deeper into a web of corruption and violence that seemed to have no end. "Rebecca," Maya said, "I think I need to take on one more case." The next morning, Maya called Morrison's lawyer. "Tell Detective Morrison I'm ready to meet with him," Maya said. "There are some questions I need to ask him about Vincent Torres." As Maya hung up the phone, she realized that her journey toward justice was far from over. The warehouse confrontation that had started with a missed shot and an unexpected confession was about to lead her into the most complex investigation of her career. Maya looked at the photo of Carlos on her desk and made him a silent promise. This time, she would uncover the whole truth, no matter how complicated or painful it might be. Maya met Morrison at a small diner in Rockford, 30 minutes from the halfway house where he was completing his supervised release. The setting was deliberately neutral, far enough from Chicago to avoid unwanted attention, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough for a serious conversation. Morrison looked older than his 42 years. Prison had changed him in ways that went beyond the graying hair and the lines around his eyes. There was a gravity to his presence now, a weight that hadn't been there during their previous encounters. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Morrison said as Maya slid into the booth across from him. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of the corruption and moral compromise she'd once seen there. What she found instead was something more complex. Genuine remorse mixed with a determination she hadn't expected. "I didn't come here for you," Maya said bluntly. "I came because I need information about Vincent Torres." Morrison nodded. "I figured it had to be something like that. What do you want to know?" Maya pulled out the folder Lisa Torres had given her, including the phone records showing contact between Torres and the state's attorney's office. "Torres was talking to prosecutors before he died. I need to know if you were aware of any cooperation agreement he might have had." Morrison studied the phone records carefully. "I wasn't aware of any official cooperation, but there were rumors in the department that Torres was getting nervous about the heat." Maya leaned forward. "What kind of heat?" Morrison glanced around the diner to make sure they weren't being overheard. By late 2016, there were multiple federal investigations circling around Chicago drug operations. Torres wasn't just paying off-street cops like Brennan and me. He was connected to much bigger players. Maya felt her investigative instincts sharpening. Who else was involved? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Have you ever heard of Deputy Chief William Garrett?" Maya shook her head. "Should I have?" Morrison's expression darkened. Garrett was running the entire corruption network. Brennan and I were small time compared to what Garrett was orchestrating. He had judges, prosecutors, and federal agents on his payroll. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "And Torres was paying Garrett too?" Morrison nodded. Torres was one of Garrett's biggest sources of income. But when the federal investigation started heating up, Torres began to panic. He knew that if he went down, he'd take a lot of important people with him. Maya processed this information, realizing that the corruption case she thought she'd solved was actually much larger than anyone had imagined. "So you think Garrett had Torres killed to prevent him from cooperating?" Maya asked. Morrison met her gaze steadily. "I think Torres was murdered because he knew too much about too many powerful people. And I think your brother's death was just collateral damage in a much bigger criminal conspiracy." Maya felt anger rising in her chest. "Collateral damage? My brother was a human being, not a casualty in some corrupt cop's business plan." Morrison held up his hands. "That's not what I meant. I meant that Carlos's murder was part of a pattern of violence used to protect a massive corruption network. His death wasn't random or senseless. It was calculated and deliberate." Maya forced herself to calm down. "Tell me about Garrett. Is he still active?" Morrison shook his head. "Garrett retired 6 months after Torres was killed. Moved to Florida with a very comfortable pension and a house that cost a lot more than a deputy chief's salary should have allowed." Maya made notes in her notebook. "Did you ever have direct contact with Garrett?" Morrison was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with something. "Garrett approached me after Carlos was killed. He wanted to make sure I understood the importance of keeping quiet about the Torres connection." Maya's pen stopped moving. "He threatened you?" Morrison nodded reluctantly. "He made it clear that if I ever talked about the broader corruption network, I wouldn't just lose my job, I'd lose my life. Garrett had connections with organized crime figures who made Torres look like a small-time dealer." Maya felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "So when you covered up Carlos's murder, you weren't just protecting yourself from corruption charges. You were protecting yourself from being killed." Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. "That doesn't excuse what I did. I should have found another way, should have gone to the FBI or the media. But I was terrified, and I chose the coward's path." Maya stared across the table at Morrison, seeing him in a new light. She'd always thought of him as a corrupt cop who'd chosen money over justice. Now she was beginning to understand that he'd been caught in a web of corruption and violence that was much more complex than she'd realized. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Maya asked. Morrison met her gaze. Because I was still afraid. Even in prison, I was worried about what might happen if I exposed Garrett and the others. But when you called asking about Torres, I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting anyone anymore. Maya closed her notebook and leaned back in her seat. If Garrett was running this entire network, and if he's the one who ultimately ordered Torres's death, then he's also responsible for covering up Carlos's murder. Morrison nodded. Garrett is the key to everything. If you can prove his involvement in the corruption network, you can probably prove his role in both murders. Maya felt a familiar surge of determination. Do you have any evidence against Garrett? Anything that could help build a case? Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. I've been documenting everything I could remember about Garrett's operation since I went to prison. Names, dates, locations, amounts of money. It's not complete, but it's a start. Maya took the flash drive, feeling its weight in her palm. Why are you giving this to me now? Morrison's expression was earnest. Because I realized that my confession and cooperation in the original corruption case wasn't enough. I helped expose street-level corruption, but I let the real criminals escape justice. Garrett and his associates are still out there, still. Probably hurting people. Maya pocketed the flash drive. What do you want in return for this information? Morrison shook his head. Nothing. I don't want anything from you, Maya. I just want to finally do the right thing, completely and honestly. Maya studied Morrison's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. What she saw was a man who'd been carrying enormous guilt for years and was finally ready to face all the consequences of his actions. There's something else, Morrison continued. If you're going to go after Garrett, you need to be careful. He's not in prison like I was. He still has connections, still has resources. And he's already killed at least 2 people to protect his secrets. Maya felt a chill of fear mixed with excitement. Are you trying to scare me away from investigating him? Morrison shook his head emphatically. I'm trying to make sure you don't end up like Carlos or Torres. Garrett is dangerous in ways that Brennan and I never were. Maya gathered her things and prepared to leave. I've been investigating dangerous people for years. I know how to protect myself. Morrison reached across the table and gently touched Maya's arm. Please be careful. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you because of the information I provided. Maya looked down at Morrison's hand on her arm, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. Despite everything he'd done, despite the years of anger she'd carried toward him, she realized that she no longer saw him as her enemy. I'll be careful, Maya said. But I'm not going to let fear stop me from getting justice for Carlos. Morrison removed his hand and nodded. I know you won't. That's what makes you braver than I ever was. As Maya walked to her car, she felt the weight of the flash drive in her pocket and the magnitude of the investigation ahead of her. She'd thought the corruption case was over, but now she realized it had just been the opening chapter of a much larger story. Maya drove back to Chicago, with her mind racing. She needed to analyze the information Morrison had given her, cross-reference it with the Torres phone records, and figure out how to safely investigate a potentially murderous former deputy chief. When Maya arrived at her foundation's offices, she found Jennifer waiting with urgent news. We have a problem, Jennifer said as soon as Maya walked through the door. Lisa Torres called an hour ago. She says someone broke into her apartment last night and stole all her files related to her uncle's case. Maya felt her blood turn cold. Was she hurt? Jennifer shook her head. She wasn't home when it happened. But whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. They only took the Torres investigation materials. Maya realized that her meeting with Morrison might not have been as private as she'd thought. Someone was watching, someone who didn't want the Torres case reopened. There's more, Jennifer continued. Agent Chun called. She said the FBI has received information suggesting that the Torres murder investigation might be connected to an Ongoing federal corruption case. Maya felt pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. Did she say what kind of federal case? Jennifer consulted her notes. Something about a multi-state corruption network involving high-ranking law enforcement officials. She wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. Maya sat down at her desk, trying to process the rapid developments. In the span of one day, her investigation had expanded from a simple murder case to a complex federal conspiracy involving organized crime, police corruption, and multiple murders. Maya's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Maya. Rodriguez, she answered. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Deputy Chief William Garrett, retired. I believe you've been asking questions about me. Maya's heart began racing, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Garrett, how did you get this number? Garrett's voice was smooth, professional, but there was an underlying threat in his tone. I understand you've been investigating some old cases that are better left closed. I'd like to meet with you to discuss your research. Maya felt trapped between fear and curiosity. What did you want to discuss? Garrett chuckled softly. I think it would be better if we talked in person. Are you available for dinner tomorrow evening? I know a quiet restaurant where we can have a private conversation. Maya's instincts screamed danger, but she also recognized an opportunity to get information directly from the source. I'll need to check my schedule, Maya said carefully. Garrett's tone became slightly more insistent. I really think it would be in your best interest to make time for our meeting. Ms. Rodriguez, there are things about your brother's case that you don't understand, and I'd hate for you to make any mistakes in your investigation. Maya felt a surge of anger at the implied threat. Are you threatening me, Mr. Garrett? Garrett's voice remained calm. Not at all. I'm simply offering to share information that might help you understand the full scope of what you're investigating. But if you prefer to continue working with incomplete information, that's your choice. Maya made a quick decision. Fine, where do you want to meet? Garrett gave her the name and address of an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., come alone and don't bring any recording devices. This will be a conversation between professionals. After Garrett hung up, Maya sat staring at her phone. She was about to walk into a meeting with a man who might have ordered her brother's death, a man who'd controlled a corruption network that had destroyed dozens of lives. Maya picked up her phone and called Agent Chun. Rebecca, it's Maya. I need to tell you about a very interesting phone call I just received. As Maya explained about Garrett's invitation, she realized that tomorrow's dinner would either provide the breakthrough she needed to solve Carlos's case once and for all, or it would be the most dangerous meeting of her life. Maya looked at Carlos's photo on her desk and made another silent promise. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would finally uncover the complete truth about his death, no matter what it cost. Her Maya arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, wearing a wire provided by Agent Chun and carrying a small GPS tracker in her purse. FBI agents were positioned at strategic locations around the building, ready to intervene if the meeting went wrong. Deputy Chief William Garrett was already seated at a corner table when Maya entered. He was a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that spoke of comfortable retirement. He stood politely as Maya approached. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming, Garrett said, gesturing for her to sit. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering wine. It's an excellent vintage. Maya sat down but ignored the wine glass. Let's skip the pleasantries, Mr. Garrett. You said you had information about my brother's case. Garrett smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Direct, I appreciate that. Yes, I do have information about Carlos, and about Vincent Torres, and about the unfortunate chain of events that connected their deaths. Maya kept her expression neutral. I'm listening. Garrett leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. Your brother witnessed something he shouldn't have seen. Not just Torres paying Morrison. That was small-time corruption. Carlos saw Torres receiving instructions about a major drug shipment that was coming through Chicago. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Instructions from who? Garrett's smile widened. From people who couldn't afford to have a witness to their operations. People who moved product worth millions of dollars through this city every month. Maya realized that Garrett was confessing to orchestrating a criminal network far beyond what anyone had imagined. You were running drugs through Chicago using corrupt police officers. Garrett nodded approvingly. Very good. Morrison and Brennan thought they were just selling information about raids and investigations. They had no idea they were protecting a distribution network that stretched from Mexico to Canada. Maya felt sick. So when Torres panicked about Carlos being a witness, he called you. Garrett sipped his wine calmly. Torres was a valuable asset, but he was also careless and emotional. When he told me about your brother, I explained that the problem needed to be handled permanently. Maya's hands clenched into fists under the table. You ordered my brother's execution. Garrett's expression didn't change. I ordered the elimination of a security threat. Your brother was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he paid the price for that mistake. Maya forced herself to stay calm, knowing that the FBI was recording every word. And then you had Torres killed when he started cooperating with prosecutors. Garrett looked impressed. You've done excellent investigative work, Ms. Rodriguez. Yes. Torres became a liability when he decided to negotiate with federal agents. He thought he could trade information about street-level corruption for immunity, but he didn't understand that he knew enough to destroy operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Maya leaned forward. How many people have you killed? To protect your drug network? Garrett considered the question as if it were an academic exercise. Over the years, perhaps a dozen. Maybe more. It's hard to keep an exact count when you're protecting such a large operation. Maya felt rage building in her chest, but she forced herself to keep gathering information. Why are you telling me this? Why confess to everything now? Garrett's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more serious. Because, Ms. Rodriguez, I'm offering you a choice. You can walk away from this investigation right now, take your family, and disappear. I'll provide enough money for you to start over. Anywhere in the world. Maya stared at him. Or, Garrett's voice became deadly quiet. Or you can continue investigating, and you'll end up like your brother, and your parents will end up like your brother, and anyone else you care about will end up like your brother. Maya felt fear and fury warring in her chest. You're threatening to kill my entire family. Garrett shook his head. I'm offering you a way to save your entire family. The choice is yours. Maya stood up abruptly. I've heard enough. Garrett remained seated, completely calm. Sit down, Ms. Rodriguez. We're not finished talking. Maya noticed that two large men had appeared near the restaurant's exits. Garrett's security team had been watching the entire time. You see, Garrett continued, I know about the FBI wire you're wearing. I know about the agents positioned around this building. I know about the GPS tracker in your purse. Did you really think I'd walk into a federal trap without taking precautions? Maya felt her blood turn cold. What are you saying? Garrett pulled out his phone and showed Maya a series of photographs. Agent Chun tied to a chair. Other FBI agents unconscious in what looked like a warehouse. Maya's parents sitting in their living room, unaware that armed men were positioned outside their house. I'm saying that if you want your friends and family to survive the night, you'll listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Maya sat back down, her mind racing. What do you want? Garrett pocketed his phone. I want you to call Agent Chun, or rather the person who's with Agent Chun right now, and tell them that your investigation into my activities is over. Tell them you've decided to accept my offer and leave Chicago permanently. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. And if I don't? Garrett's expression was matter of fact. Then by tomorrow morning, there won't be a Rodriguez family left in Chicago to mourn. Maya felt trapped in a nightmare. She'd walked into Garrett's trap thinking she was protected by the FBI, but Garrett had outmaneuvered them completely. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" Maya asked. "How do I know you won't kill my family anyway?" Garrett smiled. "Because I'm a businessman, Ms. Rodriguez. Killing you and your family creates more problems than it solves. But if you disappear quietly, everyone wins." Maya thought about Carlos, about the 8 years she'd spent seeking justice for his death. She thought about all the other families who'd been destroyed by Garrett's criminal network. She thought about the choice her mother had made to forgive Morrison, and the choice she now faced between personal survival and broader justice. "I need to make a phone call," Maya said. Garrett nodded. "Of course. But remember, I'll know if you try to warn anyone or call for help." Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized years earlier. When Morrison answered, she spoke carefully. "Jake, it's Maya. I need you to do something for me right now, no questions asked. Go to my parents' house. There are dangerous people watching them." Morrison's voice was immediately alert. "What's happening?" Maya glanced at Garrett, who was listening to every word. "I can't explain right now, but my family is in danger. You know how to handle this kind of situation." Morrison didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." Maya hung up and looked at Garrett. "There, I've protected my family. Now what?" Garrett looked confused. "Who did you call?" "That wasn't Agent Chun." Maya smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. "I called someone who spent 8 years learning how to live with the consequences of letting you get away with murder. Someone who won't make that mistake twice." Garrett's confidence wavered slightly. "What are you talking about?" Maya stood up again, this time with more assurance. "I'm talking about Jake Morrison, who's been waiting 2 years for a chance to make real amends for what he did. I'm talking about a former detective who knows every corrupt cop in Chicago and exactly how to neutralize them." Garrett reached for his phone, but Maya continued talking. "I'm also talking about the fact that your entire confession was broadcast live to FBI headquarters, not just recorded on my wire. Agent Chun anticipated your countermeasures and set up a backup transmission system." Garrett's face went pale as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. "That's impossible." Maya pulled out her phone and showed Garrett the screen, which displayed a live connection to FBI communications. "Agent Chun knew you were too smart to fall for a simple sting operation. So she created a false sting operation to hide the real one." Garrett stood up quickly. But the 2 men who'd been guarding the exits were now being arrested by FBI agents who'd been posing as restaurant staff and customers. "You see, Mr. Garrett," Maya said, "you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that everyone you were dealing with was as corrupt and selfish as you are. But some people actually care more about justice than about their own safety." Agent Chun entered the restaurant, flanked by federal agents. "William Garrett, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 20 other federal charges." As the agents handcuffed Garrett, he looked at Maya with something approaching respect. "Well played, Ms. Rodriguez. But this isn't over. I have connections you can't imagine." Maya walked over to where Garrett was standing in handcuffs. 8 years ago, you ordered the execution of a 24-year-old man whose only crime was walking home from work. Tonight, that finally catches up with you." Agent Chun approached Maya as Garrett was led away. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded, feeling emotionally drained but satisfied. "Is my family safe?" Agent Chun smiled. "Morrison neutralized Garrett's surveillance team 20 minutes ago. Your parents are fine, and they have no idea how much danger they were in." Maya felt a wave of gratitude toward Morrison that she hadn't expected. "What happens now?" Agent Chun consulted her notes. "Garrett's arrest will trigger a federal investigation into his entire network. We expect to make dozens more arrests over the next few months. This could be the biggest corruption case in Chicago's history. Maya walked outside the restaurant and saw Morrison waiting by her car. His face was bruised, and his clothes were torn, but he was smiling. "Your parents are safe," Morrison said. "Garrett's men won't be bothering anyone for a long time." Maya looked at Morrison, the corrupt cop who'd helped cover up her brother's murder, who'd spent 2 years in prison, who'd just risked his life to protect her family. "Thank you," Maya said simply. Morrison nodded. "It was the least I could do. Carlos deserved better than what happened to him 8 years ago. Maybe tonight balances the scales a little bit." Maya thought about her journey from that night in the warehouse when she'd tried to shoot Morrison and missed, when he'd said her timing was perfect even though her aim was bad. Tonight, her aim had been perfect too, not with a gun, but with justice. 6 months later, Maya stood once again at Carlos's grave in Mount Carmel Cemetery. This time, she wasn't alone. Her parents were with her, along with Morrison, Agent Chun, and Lisa Torres, who'd become an advocate for other families affected by police corruption. "It's finally over," Maya said to Carlos's headstone. Garrett and 19 other people were convicted. The corruption network is gone. And maybe other families won't have to go through what we did. Carmen Rodriguez placed fresh flowers on her son's grave. "Carlos would be proud of you, Mia. You never gave up on him." Maya looked around at the group of people who'd become an unlikely family through their shared pursuit of justice. Morrison had started a nonprofit organization helping former police officers transition to legitimate careers. Agent Chun had been promoted for her work on the corruption case. Lisa Torres was studying law, planning to become a prosecutor. As they walked away from the cemetery together, Maya realized that her brother's death had ultimately led to something positive. Not just justice for Carlos, but systemic change that would protect other families from the same tragedy. Maya's aim had been bad that night in the warehouse when she'd tried to shoot Morrison. But her timing had been perfect, just as he'd said. Perfect timing to start a chain of events that would ultimately bring down the real criminals and create something meaningful from her family's loss. The story that began with revenge had ended with redemption, not just for Morrison, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by Carlos Rodriguez's brief time on Earth, and the long quest for justice that followed his death. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.